With the Federal Reserve on a warpath to crush inflation by their consistent rate hikes, economists predict there's about a 7 in 10 chance that the economy may sink into a recession in 2023. And even though 2023 is quickly approaching, this is still a great time to start preparing for the possibility of a recession happening. So in this video, we'll discuss the 8 most important things you can do today to prepare for a possible recession. Hey guys, it's Jonathan here. So as we go through these 8 different things you could do to prepare for a recession, I just want to tell you guys that even though I am a financial advisor, I am not your personal financial advisor, and I don't understand your personal situation, so I cannot comment on it. So I highly encourage you to please reach out to a financial advisor if you need more details or support. But anyways, let's get right into it. So the first thing you could do to prepare for a recession is that if you don't already have this in place, you should make a budget. You can't manage your finances if you don't have a plan in place to manage your finances. And that's exactly what a budget is. It's pretty much a plan on how you plan to spend your money. And I know that there's some people who try to kind of keep track of their expenses in their head. But to be honest, this doesn't really work. A lot of times we don't realize how much money we're spending on food or other items. So really we have to focus on not only making a budget, but making a budget that we actually write down. So what you have to do is that when you make a budget, you actually have to write it down somewhere, whether it's a sheet of paper, a journal, Excel spreadsheet, whatever it may be. Personally, I like Excel spreadsheet because it's much easier to do calculations and to revise later on. And really, in this budget, you need to account for every single dollar of your income. So the way I like to do it is start off with the income first. So focus on your paycheck. If you have a side hustle, the money you're getting from your side hustle. I even include interest income from there as well, if I could estimate that. And then after that, you really want to focus on your expenses. And you want to have not only categories, but you want to have detailed categories of expenses. You really shouldn't, I got this from an accountant once, that the worst thing you could do on your taxes if you have a business is to have a very large miscellaneous section. And really every item that you purchase should have a category for it, even if it means you have to create more categories. So you want to make sure you have detailed categories. And then once you get to the bottom, that's where you want to focus on saving. And the way you want to do your savings is that you want to say, okay, we are going to save, $1,000 a month, let's just say. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you have like a priority list of your savings. So maybe for you, it'll be like the first priority is to max out the 401k. And when we max out the 401k, we're going to take that money and we're going to buy like a lifetime fund that's going to adjust according to our preferred retirement date. Or maybe you say, hey, we're going to, then after that, we're going to max out our IRA and we're going to buy an S&P 500 fund, for example, and so on and so on. So that way there's a I always like to say this from someone who I learned this from, there's pretty much a soup to nuts path for your money. So it's not like there's any like, oh, this money is just going to be in this account and then it's just going to float around there forever. No, it needs to actually like have a purpose. So like this money is going to be invested. This money is going to be saved so we could take a trip to Cabo 3 weeks from now or something like that. Like it needs to have defined purposes. And this is really important because if you don't define your expenses, you'll have a lot of leaks in your finances. So making a budget does kind of expose those leaks that you have in your budget and allows you to fix them. And this will be extremely important in a recession where there may be a higher possibility of you dealing with a job loss or a reduction of income. So the next thing that you want to do to prepare for a recession is to pay off high interest debt. So typically in any recession, this is very important, as loosening up cash flow does give you more safety in case of a job loss. Given that we're heading into a Federal Reserve-induced inflationary recession, the actions of the Federal Reserve is causing increased borrowing rates. So a lot of the variable high interest debt becomes even more problematic in this situation because not only are you dealing with the fact that there may be the possibility of job loss in the future, but you're also dealing with the fact that inflation is starting to kill your purchasing power. And then on top of that, the Fed rate hikes are also adding to that pain by making it more expensive to service variable rate debt. So for example, let's say you had $5,000 of credit card debt at 18% interest rate at the beginning of the year. It would cost you about $75 a month to make interest-only payments at the beginning of the year. But if the interest rate increased linearly with the Fed rate hikes that have happened mostly throughout this year, your interest will now be around 22%, and your monthly interest payment would be about $93 a month. Even though we have seen data recently that does state that inflation is starting to deflect to the downside, the Federal Reserve has made it very clear that they are still going to keep pressure on inflation to make sure that it doesn't come back again. So we could continue to see rates move up even into 2023 as well. And this is why it's so important to pay off this kind of debt, because it does have the possibility of causing you to become insolvent or pretty much for you to not have the margin in your budget to be able to service this debt. It is a really good idea to get rid of a lot of this high interest variable debt while you still can. So the next thing you want to do to prepare for a recession is to build an emergency fund. So in a recession, we normally see the unemployment rate move up. And because the unemployment rate moves up, that means that less and less employers need as many employees. And this causes employees' PP to soften. And by PP, I mean pricing power. That means that the price that you charge per hour for your time starts to go down, and your market value starts to go down as well. And also due to unfortunate possibility of job loss or a reduction in income during a recession, it's important to have an emergency fund in place just in case of these situations, so you can still pay your bills and still make your monthly payments that you need to make. So the general recommendation is to have about 3 to 6 months worth of your normal lifestyle expenses. And you could determine this very easily with your budget by pretty much adding up all of your expenses and multiplying it by 3 to 6 months, and boom, there's the goal for your emergency fund. Personally, I like to have about 9 months to a year's worth of expenses saved in an emergency fund. But for me, I also keep my emergency fund in the stock market. So I tend to have that higher time frame just because if the market was to have, I would still be in the 3 to 6 month range. So something else that I think is really great to do in a recession is to reduce outlays. And pretty much what outlays are just planned expenses, which also plays into what I was saying earlier about making a budget. So for example, let's say you're someone who upgrades their phone every year. Maybe during a recession or when you're about to head into recession, maybe you put off that expense until the following year or the following year or two until you actually need a new phone. Or maybe if you're someone who eats out multiple times a week, maybe you reduce that amount to 1 or 2 times a week. That way you can kind of lower the amount of money you are spending on going out to eat. So, and this is important whether you lose your job or not, because it does give you more opportunities to be able to build your wealth. And we'll get into more details about that later on in the video. But it is, of course, very important if you do lose your job, because it does allow you to make your emergency fund last longer. You know, one of the things I like to always say is that if I'm not working, then my expenses pretty much go to the bare bones. That means that cut out the extra subscriptions, cut out the eating out, pretty much just live on base everything just during that time. And then once I get back to work, then you can now start enjoying some more luxuries. So something else you could do to prepare for a recession is to get a secure job or to get more secured work. And let me explain that a little bit. So most employees and small business owners are usually aware, or at least they should be, about how secure their position is in the marketplace. And what you really have to focus on is your security in the position that you have as an employee as much as possible. So you have to ask yourself, Have you done everything possible to provide as much value to your employer as possible? If the answer is no, then you really need to start thinking about how can you provide more value to your employer. And this can be anything like maybe getting some license or certifications, or taking on more tasks, or maybe even if you work for a private company, like showing up earlier, leaving later, things like that. Or maybe even filling in some positions that you see are crucial at your workplace. And if you are let go, this kind of thinking will also help you land another position fairly quickly. So that way you don't have to dig through your emergency fund too much. And if you're self-employed, you really have to think about, do you have the resources to make it through a recession? You have to think, this is something that, again, like, it's not personal financial advice, but it's just something that you can think about, is that would it make more sense for you to go to a 9-to-5 job instead of being self-employed? Maybe you might make some more money, or you might get some better benefits. Maybe just for the time being while the market is very rough. Just something to consider. Something else you could do is diversify your investments. So this would have been really good advice at the beginning of the year, but this can still be pretty applicable if you're someone who maybe you work for a publicly traded company, and the only stock you buy is the company that you work for. During a recession, this could be somewhat problematic, because if the company does go bankrupt, not only is there a high probability you lose your job, but there's also a high probability that your stocks would be worthless as well. So it's really important to consider diversifying according to your risk tolerance. And again, that's something that you should really consider talking to a financial advisor about. And this also does apply to people who have built very outsized positions in very speculative assets. I know during a bull run, it's very easy for people to have a very massive portion of their portfolio in very speculative assets. And even though we have seen a lot of these speculative assets lose a ton of value over the past year, nothing stops it from losing even more if we do go into a recession. So, I'm not going to tell you to sell or to not sell, but I would just say be very careful that, these companies, especially these investments, especially ones that are the more speculative side, do have the opportunity to go zero if they do face a recession. So going back on what I said about high interest debt, something else you should really focus on is getting out of margin. So pretty much, for those of you who don't know what margin is pretty much a loan that you take out against the stocks that you own. So if you own $100,000 of stocks, depending on the brokerage, it may allow you to borrow up to $50,000 against the value of the stocks. And if you don't pay them back, then they'll just sell your stocks and pay themselves back and then pay you the money. Right now, given that the market has taken such a dramatic downturn, it is very tempting to look at that as an option to be able to buy more shares of your favorite stocks or ETFs. But in this market, it's very dangerous to touch margin just because no one really knows where the bottom is. Like I said earlier in the video, this is a Federal Reserve induced recession. And again, like the Federal Reserve has said, they will stop at nothing to make sure that inflation is under control. So whatever evidence they need before they get inflation under control, that means that they're going to continue to keep hiking rates and hiking rates and hiking rates. So, which only puts more down pressure on the stock market. And what could end up happening is that you could end up borrowing against margin, investing it into a market, and the market continues to go down, and then you get margin called at the bottom of the market, and you're pretty much forced to sell everything at the bottom, and you miss the run up after we hit the bottom. So again, margin is not really where you want to be. And then going back to what I said about high interest debt as well, is that margin debt is also tends to move linear compared to the federal funds rate. So as the Fed continues to hike rates, the rates on margin loans also go up as well. So again, it's not really the kind of situation you want to be in. The next thing that you want to do in a recession is to buy the dip. Historically, stock prices tend to fall as we enter a recession. So now may be a really great time to buy the dip on your favorite stocks. And I know this can be difficult because you've probably been buying the dip ever since the beginning of this year. But if you don't have any more money to buy the dip, something else you consider versus taking out margin loan is all of the saving strategies that we talked about earlier in this video. I think that a lot of people, if they do take advantage of those strategies, can find a significant amount more money to be able to invest into a market. But another thing you can do is that you could, if you work for an employer that allows you to work overtime, you can consider working overtime to earn more money so you can put that money to work. Or maybe if you have an employer that doesn't allow overtime, maybe you get a second job and use the money from that second job to invest into the market as well. Or if you're self-employed, you could figure out how to work more hours or to create new verticals to create that income so you can put more of that money to work. So pretty much that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.